It was rumored that on March 26, 1839, on the 10th day of Muharram, when the Muslims mourned the martyrdom of Hussein ibn Ali, the grandson of Muhammad, when men whipped their backs with chains or blades until their skin ripped like new limbs were forcing their way out, and blood gathered on their backs and onto the ground like a trail of repentance, because a single tear shed for Hussein washes away 100 sins. It is rumored that Khurshid had discovered lesions on her right hand, a lighter color than her earth-colored skin. Dr. Hosseini, thinking it was the first sign of leprosy, had advised Khurshid to kill a dog, to cut its belly open and dip her infected hand deep into its stomach, to let the warm blood from within the coil of its intestine lift the disease from her body, because this, you see, is what smart men thought back then. Khurshid followed the doctor's orders because he was, after all, a doctor, a Muslim doctor for that matter. She found a stray dog in an alleyway and stuck a blade into its beating heart. As the dog whimpered, she said a prayer for him. It was a love wound, and the smell of it echoed through the alley. Word spread quickly because back then this was the only speed words knew how to travel, like a lightning bolt through Idgah and the other neighborhoods in Mashhad, and suddenly the screams and cries of the mourners came to a halt. The city was bloody and silent. What had this Jew done? Why on this of all days? It was a mockery of Hussein of Islam, and particularly offensive because dogs were so goddamn dirty. Had it been a goat or a lamb or a graceful horse, perhaps they could have forgiven Khurshid. But a dog was unacceptable. A dog turned a rumor into rage, and soon an angry crowd stormed the Mahalle, burning down the only synagogue they had, destroying the Torah scroll, breaking into homes and looking for Khurshid, the woman, and her bloody hands they were set on destroying. Hearing word that the men were coming for her, Khurshid blocked her door with a heavy wooden table and wrapped her hand, which was now a deep red, almost turned into black from all the blood and guts of the canine, around her two daughters. There was only a small window in her home, but a ceramic vase filled with jasmine flowers sat on the table and brought a freshness inside the space, giving them more air to breathe. The angry men stormed into her home, knocking over the table and the vase, and as they stepped on the flowers with their boots, they released the scent into the air, and Khurshid's daughter suddenly transformed into pieces of her body, a liver, a heart that she needed to protect in order to survive, to keep breathing in this world, her very eyes. "Give us the pretty one," they yelled, pointing to Hannah, Rabbi Cohen's aunt, who had light hair the color of wet sand and eyes that looked like 2 green moons. "Those eyes are so beautiful, they look edible," they said. They were unaware of the tiger stripe that went through Turan, her other daughter's eyes, making her look like some kind of exotic animal. They forced Hannah away from her mother, and Khurshid shrieked as if her 2 eyes were being torn out by their roots. It was a mother's shrill cry, and one that for a moment, and really, it was just a moment, made these men with their knives think of their own mothers, and of Hussein the martyr, and it made them ask themselves if he would in fact have approved of such a brutal act. But it really was just a moment, one that passed as quickly, if not even quicker, than the smell of an innocent fart, and as Khurshid held onto what was left of her very heart, Turan, Rabbi Cohen's mother, they brought a cold knife, as if it had just been dipped into a stream where even the fish had stopped in their paths from the sharp readiness of the blade, up against Khurshid's neck. Her husband Kurosh had been there the whole time, but watched from a darkened corner where he looked upon his family and silently wept because he was a coward. Because even during sex he could not speak, would not make a peep, had never said to Khurshid one nice thing, had never made her feel like more than a woman who washed things. As a child, his father had beaten his voice out from him, and he never really could find it again. The men presented a Torah to Khorshid as graciously as if it was their own holy book, and the man who held Hannah's hand with his bloodied one, the one whose bare back had been scratched up and torn open from his own abuse, his nose hairs almost merging with his mustache, demanded that she spit on it. And the other one, who had blood even in its eyes, presented her with a plate. On it was a skewer of sweaty meat, a perfectly formed piece of kebab, and next to it, a few spoonfuls of yogurt, the nemesis of any properly kosher Jew. Eat this meat with this yogurt, the one with the bloody eyes said. Khorshid didn't budge. It is the only way to know you believe, the man continued, that you are willing to become a woman of our faith. Khorshid looked at Turan's eyes, which were so wide now it seemed the gold stripe that went through them, through her brown pupils, were in fact covering her entire eye. Hannah screamed, and the man with the nose hair mustache slapped her, leaving a streak of blood across her lips, which made her face look rosy and grown up. Although Khorshid was an illiterate woman, a woman who had believed the doctor because he was, after all, a doctor, and she was a fat woman who loved kebab more than anything in this world, she could not let her daughter see her become this, a woman who merely washed things and ate meat with yogurt when a Muslim man told her to do so. It was the woman's job to preserve their culture and their religion. This she believed with all her heart. With the ferociousness of some wild beast, she gathered spit in the back of her throat, and with dry eyes she turned her face slightly and spit into the man's blood-stained eyes. Take my God from me, you Khal, you ass, and you take my life. They slit her throat in front of her two daughters and her husband Kurosh, and before her eyes closed for good, she noticed a small figure jerk its body away from the men and towards the door. A little boy, not more than 4 years old, who had come in with the men, but who she had not noticed until then. A little boy who, when Khorshid finally fell to the ground, had already begun to weep. When Kurosh saw the trail of his wife's blood that reached his feet, he finally screamed, a sound they both had been waiting a long time for. The walls could not contain the sound. A long crack began to form on the washed-out grayness, a crack like a line on the palm of a hand that predicted longevity and a strong will to live. But there was only silence after that. Even after his wife's eyes closed and Hannah was taken to Imam Jome's house, where she was given a pretty necklace with a ruby in the center and wedded to him, still Kurosh remained silent. 40 others died that day, and Jewish leaders climbed onto the rooftops of what was left of their unsturdy homes and announced that all the Jews of Mashhad would convert. The Jews believed they deserved this, that this was God punishing them for their sins. Kurosh lived a quiet life with the only other person left to him, Turan. And in fresh air and rainstorms, or when the sun hit his hot black head, he bowed and prayed on his knees when the other Muslims did, changing his name from Kurosh to Ali Reza. But when he came home to Turan, they would light the Shabbat candles and she would prepare kosher meals for him, and Turan would ask him questions about what being Jewish meant, because she knew she was the only one who could save it for the both of them. Her father began to talk to Turan, would tell her what he knew of the Torah and the stories of their people, and more personal stories of her mother Khorshid and how much she had loved her daughters, but more than that, her God. Turan wished to know this God deeply. Her father began calling her Khoshgel, pretty, instead of Turan, and even though she missed her sister, she was happy to be considered the pretty one. Father and daughter preserved their religion through these simplistic rituals. Ali Reza and Khoshgel lived as Muslims, but many years later, when they finally moved to Esfahan, they had survived as Jews.